Welcome to a multi-part series for Noblox.js, a Node.js wrapper for interacting with the Roblox API. This project has been forked from Roblox.js several years ago, which was originally held by Roost. Now, Noblox.js allows you to do things, as you can see here, through a Node.js interface, which is basically JavaScript. You can use Noblox.js along with Roblox's HTTP service feature to create scripts that you can interact with the Roblox website through inside of your games. If you're looking for more information to create something like this, check out this repository and so on. Now, the series, the first episode that we're on right now, it's going to be recreating Noblox.js, except the server API. Now, the first thing that you will need to have is Node.js installed on your computer. You can click this link here and download it at any time. And you will also need some form of IDE, which is basically an integrated developer environment where you can write your code. Personally, I use WebStorm, as you can see here. There are other options like VS Code. Now, I already went ahead and set up a folder for our project here. Now, the first thing you want to do inside of your folder is run yarn init if you have yarn installed, or you might want to run npm init, which is basically npm initialize. Now, we're going to give our project a name. We're going to give it a version, an API for using Noblox.js. We're going to create an entry point. We're going to call this one server.js. We're going to skip repository URL, author. I'm just going to put my name. License. You can put MIT or you can put unlicensed. It doesn't really matter unless you're going open source with it. Leave it as MIT. Private, you probably want to keep that true. So you can type in true. And it creates a package.json file inside your repository, as you can see here. Now, once all that is set up, the first thing you're going to do is install Noblox.js within your actual project. So we can go ahead and do npm install Noblox.js if you are using npm. I'm using yarn, and you might want to keep some consistency because they create two different lock files. I'm going to do yarn add Noblox.js. And as you can see here, it goes through and installs the program, or the library. Once it's installed, you can see a new folder inside called Node Modules. Inside here, there's a bunch of stuff, and you'll eventually see Noblox.js if you scroll down. Now, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to create our file where we run our code. So, create a new JavaScript file. We're going to call it server.js because that's where we said that our file would be. Now, this file needs content. So the first line I'm going to put is I'm going to import my Noblox.js library. So const, which means constant, nbx equals require Noblox.js. And now now this just basically adds the library to this file. I can use it at any point. Now the next thing I'm going to do for testing purposes is I'm going to try it out. So I'm going to write async function. Let's give it a name, test. Inside here, I'm going to do await. The reason I'm doing await is because promises exist. Promises are basically the code promising you that this thing is eventually going to be resolved. It's going to happen. But whether it's going to pass or fail, that's going to be up to whatever the code is about. Now, here I'm going to do something like await Noblox, get username from ID, as you can see there. And I'm going to put an ID, 555-49140. And I'm going to run my function. So this is my file. It's called server.js. How do I run it? So I can do something like node server.js. And it runs my file. Except nothing gets outputted because I don't print anything. To print lines in JavaScript, you need to do console log. So I'm going to assign this username to a variable. We're going to call it const username equals await blah blah blah. I'm going to put username in there. And I'm going to save this, and I'm going to rerun my project. And there you go. I get my username back. Now, what if I don't want to constantly run node server.js every single time. And by the way, I'm hitting the up arrow to get my previous line. I can use something called nodemon. So in order to install nodemon, I can do npm install nodemon. We're going to install it globally. And it should install properly. And once it's installed, I can do nodemon server.js. Now it's running. Now this project exited because it's no longer running. But if I change the ID to say something like 1, which would be Roblox, you see that it gets outputted in my terminal here. I'm going to revert back to 555.491.40. Get my username back. Now the purpose of this is to create an API where I can send requests from a Roblox game to the API to get data back. Now, there are different options on what you can use to send and get data. There are different frameworks out there, but what I'm going to use for this project is called Koa. And Koa is basically it's pretty similar to Express.js. It was made by the same team behind it. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to install Koa. I need to install everything that I'm planning on using. So yarn add or npm install, depending on what you're on, Koa, because that's what the documentation lists the name as. And once it's installed, it's done. I can go ahead and import it again. So const Koa equals require Koa. And there you go, it's installed. Documentation is probably one of the most important parts of programming. Once you encounter an unfamiliar library, it's always best to read the documentation on that library's website. So I'm on koajs.com, and here I can see their documentation. How do I set up a basic server layout? I just copy this code right here. I'm going to go ahead and copy it, and I paste it. This basically sets up a server that I can interact with at any time for my project. So I can run server.js again. And it runs a server, even though it doesn't print anything right now. It runs a server on port 3000 on my local computer. So if I go to localhost 3000, I see hello world, which is what's being put out here. I can put hello you, save it, and reruns it, or well, I'm sorry, nodemon server.js, and it's running again. If I refresh, I see hello you, hello me, I can refresh, and it changes. This is basically an API. I can access this from any point, any location, assuming that it's running on a server with a public IP address. Now, we want to use Noblox with this, so we're going to go ahead and re-import Noblox into this project. I'm going to put it up here. Keep all your imports near each other. And we have something like this. Now, what I can also do here is I can make the body run a Noblox function. So I can do get username from ID, and we're awaiting it because this is an asynchronous function. As you can see here, this async right there. And await get username from ID 555491. I save this. If I go over here and I refresh, it puts my username out there. Okay, so what if I want to include more functions? What can I do about that? So I can go ahead and set up different routes for my application. So I can go ahead and find Koa Router. Koa Router is basically a way to manage all those endpoints that I can access on my custom API. I'm going to go ahead and click the first link, which sends me here. And I look at this and I see that it's what I want. So I'm going to scroll down and I'm going to find how do I install this package. So it says yarn add Koa Router. I'm going to go ahead and copy that and back over to WebStorm. If you want, you can use two terminals, which I'm going to do here. So I'm going to split to the right. Opens a new instance there. And I add Koa Router. It's going to restart a few times on the left as it adds the files. Once it's in, I can do const. Actually, let's go back to documentation to make sure what we're doing is correct. So API reference, as you can see there. There's a whole bunch of information here. But the most important part is right here, this example with its basic usage. we have const koa, and right below it we have const router. We're going to go ahead and do that. And then we have app, which we have right here, and it has router. So we're going to go ahead and put router right there. Router get ctx, which is context, and then next. We can also, we also have to do this, app use router routes and router allowed methods. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to replace this bottom part. And if I go back to my project, it's not going to work. It says not found. That's because there's no entry for getting this front page. So all we need to do is do router get. We're going to put the path. Path is basically what we put to the very end of a URL. So I can do 555.491.40. It still shows not found. But what if I do 555.491.40 there? ctx next. And I do ctx status, or maybe actually body, equals Noblox get username from ID. How about this? Is this going to work? Let's try it. So I run it, check back over here, and I refresh. I get something really weird here. Before I got quest, now I'm getting is fulfilled, false, is rejected, false. What you see right here is a promise. Or it's a stringified form of a promise. I don't want to deal with this. I want my actual result. So that's why I'm going to go back here, and I'm going to turn the function right here into an asynchronous function by writing async right before it, and putting await right before my Noblox get username from ID. All methods within Noblox are asynchronous. So I'm going to go ahead and save this, go back to my page, refresh, and it shows quest. And that's what I wanted. Now, if I removed ctx body, and I just did this, where I just await the function and I don't return anything, and I save this, my website isn't going to work. It says not found again. That's because I need to actually return something from this endpoint. I'm going to do ctx body. There's also another option. It's ctx status. If I do 200, which means OK in HTTP, so HTTP status codes, there's a whole list of them. And you can see here, this is 100 continue, successful responses, 200 means OK. There's also 404, which is not found. It's pretty popular. I'm going to go ahead and put 200. And if I go back here, it's going to say OK. So I'm going to revert back to what I had before. ctx body get username from ID. This is my first entry. Now, what if I wanted to get the username from an ID for any user that puts in their ID? Can I do that? I can. So the first thing I'm going to do is go back to the Koa documentation. So I'm going to go over here, and I'm going to find something called params, or parameters, and I'm going to look around. I don't really see anything here. So this is probably one of the most important parts of programming. Google it. So once you don't know something, the first place you should always look is the documentation. If it's not there, then it's time to look to Google. So I'm going to type in Koa, use parameters. And I'm looking around, and I see get request parameters with Koa's router. It's on Stack Overflow. Stack Overflow is pretty popular for finding what you need help with. So I go there, and I look at their code. Okay, I see this. Looks pretty similar to my code. This is Koa's router documentation on parameters. Hang on, but I went here. It wasn't in here. It's in Koa router? Perhaps. If I look down in this file, or in this API documentation, and do params, URL parameters, named route parameters are captured and added to ctx params. So if you check out here, where I have category and then title, I can console log these parameters that I pass, which is category in that first box, and title, and I get this. Now, I want to do something similar to my project. So what if I do get username from ID, so I know what I'm dealing with, then I put the ID of the parameter. Let's for console logging what we want. We want ctx params. If I save that and I go back to my page, not found. That's because I changed the URL. Get username from ID. And this says quest. This is what I wanted. But what if I change it to, say, 58? I don't know who 58 is, but it still shows me quest. But if I check the console, ID is what I keep passing here. It's that final numeric entry down here. And now I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to pass ctxparams.id into my getUsername from ID function. Let's save it. Starting, and it's restarted. Go ahead, refresh. Curse. Okay. And that got the job done. This is what I wanted. Now there is a small caveat. If you're dealing with other methods like promote, it's not really going to let you take in a string value here. So this 58 right here, even though it's a number, it's actually a string. A string is a series of characters combined to make, it's like the letters in a word, except it can be more than letters. It can be numbers, it can be spaces, but it's basically how words are formed on your computer. It's not a number, but what if I want to turn it into a number? I can do something like console log. I can wrap it in number, do ctxparams.id. And if I save it and I refresh, I'm going to see 58 in my console here. This is an actual number that I can use with functions like promote. Now this is the entry of just one get method. I can also do things like router post. I can do router put, router patch. There's all sorts of HTTP methods that I can use. The one I want to use depends on which use case I have for it. Now getting, it's for getting information from a server. Posting is sending data to the server. Putting is changing data on the server, pretty similar to patch. And there's different aspects. There's different methods that I can be using. Now if I do HTTP methods, REST API, I can find a whole list of them. So HTTP methods for RESTful services. And here I can see the most common ones. Post, which means create, and it creates things. Get, put, patch, delete. There's all sorts of methods. There's also this one. Now, there's a small little caveat here with this get method. What if I do something like a really long number? It's unlikely to be someone's user ID. I get internal server error. If I'm trying to get something from the server, how do I know this isn't a valid ID? If I check out WebStorm and I look at my terminal, I have an error here. Error, user does not exist. We need to handle our errors properly. One way we can do this is by using catch, which we can just put .catch at the end of our promised function. And I can do error, or I have to put a function inside. And I have the first parameter being passed is error. I'm going to abbreviate it as ERR. What do I want to do with this error? Should I just go ahead and console log it? I save it and it's restarting. I get the same thing. It doesn't really change much. But what if I do ctx body equals, and I can actually pass a object. Success, false. Message, error. I save this. Go back to our website. Refresh. That didn't work. Oh, here's our issue. We have ctx.body right here. We don't want that, so I'm going to remove that. And it's going to handle our errors properly this time. It works. And message is blank. What if I passed 5554940, which is a valid user? It says not found. That's because our endpoint isn't returning anything when it's a valid ID. So that's why I'm going to put then. And this passes, or this gives me a argument or a parameter called username. And here I can do ctx body equals success true message. Well, I'm going to do data. Put username there. Now I have two options. So if I'm past a valid user ID in which a user exists, I get a username. And this is this then part. So I get information and then I do something with that information I got, username here. And in my ctx body, I do success true and data equals username, which is the information that was returned from here. And if I save this and go back to this, message or success true and data is quest. This is exactly what I wanted. What if I don't have a proper ID? It says success false and the message is still blank. Let's go ahead and fix that. If I do console log.error and I go ahead and pass that wrong ID again, I see that it does give me an error here, but the issue is I can't really do anything with it. I'm going to go ahead and turn that into string format. So toString. So I turn my error into a string so that I can properly pass it to the API. Go ahead and save. This is that toString method. If I return it, or if I refresh it, I get error user does not exist, and this is what I wanted. By doing this, well, one small caveat again. If I do inspect, and I check my network tab, refresh, the status I got is okay. And it's not okay. Success false is not okay. I have to go back and change the status provided by the message by doing ctx.status equals. Let's go back to our HTTP response sheet. So I want 404 not found, forbidden, unauthorized bad request, and so on. I'm probably going to stick with 404 not found. This means that there is not a user for this ID. So if I go here, I can do ctx body. This is the body of my message. ctx status equals 404. If I save it, it restarts. I go here and I refresh. User does not exist. I get the message I wanted. And if I check here, I have a status code of 404, not found. Now, if I'm actually working with this with a Discord bot or a game, I can analyze the status code and figure out, is this what I wanted? If it's a 200, then I know this is exactly what I wanted and I can use this data. Or if I want, I can parse this JSON formatted message and do stuff with it. If it is a 200 message, go ahead and do something with it. It's for the game. But if it's not, let's not do anything with it. Otherwise, we're going to break our code because we have an error and we don't want that. So that's why we catch our information here. Now, this is episode 1. We'll cover other aspects of noblocks.js, but this is just one method that you can use.